Have you ever stopped to think that a simple gesture can change everything? That sometimes what you do in silence, expecting nothing in return, can become the beginning of a story that transforms not just one life, but an entire town? In today's video, you're about to witness a story that's realistic, deep, and emotionally powerful. The kind that makes us believe again in the strength of small gestures, in the beauty of staying, and in a love that doesn't need grand promises. Only presence. But before we begin, I have a special invitation for you. To truly connect with this story, drop a comment below telling us which city or country you're watching from. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. And when the video ends, come back and rate this story from 0 to 5. Was it moving? Did it make you reflect? Share your thoughts with us. And of course, subscribe to the channel right now so you never miss a story that touches, heals, moves, and transforms. Just like this one. Here, every story is told from the heart. And if you're here, it's not by accident. So take a deep breath. Turn off the noise around you. Put on your headphones if you can, and get ready to fully experience this with an open heart, because now, the story begins. And who knows, maybe it'll find you exactly where your heart needed it most. Shall we begin? The wind cut through the narrow streets of Willow Creek like a blade, chasing every last bit of warmth from the night. Melanie pulled her coat tighter around her and crossed her arms, her breath forming little clouds as she passed the closed bakery. Her shift at the town diner had just ended, and all she wanted was to collapse into bed. But as she turned the corner onto Maple Avenue, something made her stop. A figure sat hunched against the side of the laundromat, barely visible in the shadows. He wasn't moving. At first, she thought it was just an old coat someone had tossed aside. But then the shape stirred. Melanie took a hesitant step forward, her instincts warring with caution. The man was clearly shivering, his hands tucked deep inside the sleeves of a jacket far too thin for the freezing weather. His face was obscured by the hood of his sweatshirt. "Hey," she said softly, keeping her voice low. "Kind. Are you okay?" He didn't answer right away. Just a nod. Barely. Melanie looked around. No one was out. No cars passed. The town had gone to sleep, leaving behind silence and cold. "You'll freeze out here," she added, kneeling slowly in front of him. Still no response. Just a glimpse of blue eyes under the hood, sharp but exhausted. That was all it took. She knew that look. She'd worn it once, too. Without thinking much more, Melanie slipped off her backpack, pulled out the old fleece blanket she kept for emergencies. It was worn, but warm. She gently draped it over his shoulders. "Here," she whispered. "At least take this." He blinked at her, the briefest flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "You don't have to talk. Just don't die out here." She expected him to push it away, to grumble or curse. Instead, he clutched the blanket tightly. Melanie hesitated, then fished into her coat pocket and pulled out a granola bar. "Take this too. I know it's not much." He took it. No words, but she saw his hands tremble. Not just from cold, there was something else in that shake. Shame, pain, gratitude. "I'm Melanie," she said before getting up. "You don't have to tell me your name." The man didn't. He simply nodded again. Something about the way he looked at her, like he hadn't expected kindness, stayed with her long after she walked away. Back in her small apartment above the bookstore, Melanie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about him, who he was, why he was out there. She had grown up learning to mind her own business, to not give more than she could afford to lose. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't about being charitable. It was about not being able to walk away when someone looked that lost. Melanie stared at the ceiling. The image of the stranger, wrapped in her blanket, wouldn't leave her mind. In the morning, she went back. Same corner, same spot. But he was gone. Blanket too. Melanie wasn't sure if she felt relieved or worried. "Hope you're okay," she muttered to the empty street, clutching her coffee. She turned to go, convincing herself it was just one moment. A passing thing. People disappear in and out of our lives all the time. That's just how the world works. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, is that the man she helped was not just a stranger. He was Ryan Whitmore, the billionaire heir to the Whitmore Industries empire. A man who had vanished from the public eye after a family scandal rocked the nation 2 years ago. The world thought he was in Europe, or in hiding. No one knew the truth. Ryan had come to Willow Creek under a fake name. Broken, burned out, disillusioned with the world he once ruled. He hadn't expected to find anything in this town, much menos warmth. But in a single gesture, a woman had reminded him what humanity felt like. It shook him, not just the kindness, but her eyes, her voice, the way she gave without expecting anything. He hadn't said thank you. He couldn't. Not then. Not yet. But that night, as he lay in the back of the abandoned van he was staying in, he held the blanket close and whispered to himself, "Melanie." He hadn't spoken her name aloud until then, and when he said it, it felt like a promise. A beginning. Something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The next day, Ryan left town, but not without leaving something behind. An idea. A desire to rebuild. To become someone again. Not for the boardrooms. Not for the headlines. For himself. And maybe, someday, for her. He needed time. To heal. To fight the demons that had brought him down. But Willow Creek was no longer just a detour. It had become the place he wanted to return to. Weeks passed. Melanie tried to forget. Life moved on. Bills, customers, coffee orders, laundry. But some nights, when the wind howled against the windows, she'd remember. Wonder. She never told anyone about the man she helped. It didn't feel like her story to tell. Only once did she admit it, to herself. He looked like someone important, she whispered. And then one morning, everything changed. A shiny black car pulled up in front of the old publishing house that had been for sale for years. Town gossip lit up like wildfire. A buyer. A big one. Rumors swirled. A company acquisition. A possible relocation. New jobs, new money. Melanie didn't care much until she saw the man step out of the car. Same eyes. Same silence. Same presence. This time, in a suit that cost more than her rent. Her heart stopped. The man from that freezing night was back. Only now, he was standing on Main Street with the confidence of someone who could buy the whole block. Ryan Whitmore had returned, and Melanie didn't know whether to run or to speak. He saw her. Their eyes locked, and for a second, it was like the world paused. The street noise faded. The morning light softened, and the memory of a blanket shared in silence returned with full force. Ryan took a step toward her, then another. Melanie froze, coffee cup trembling in her hand. "You kept me alive," he said. It was the first time she heard his voice, and it would not be the last. Melanie blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. The man who once shivered under a street lamp now stood in front of her like he belonged in a magazine spread. But his eyes, those piercing, tired eyes, hadn't changed. I didn't do anything," she finally replied, her voice small, but steady. Ryan shook his head gently. "You stopped. That's everything." There was no arrogance in his tone, no hint of the man the headlines had once painted. Just quiet gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. People were beginning to watch. A few heads turned. Small towns notice everything. Melanie cleared her throat, stepping slightly aside. "You probably have a meeting," she said awkwardly. "Don't let me keep you." Ryan looked around, then back at her. "I do, but it can wait." There was a pause, not rushed, not forced, just the kind that makes you realize a new story might be about to begin. "Would you have coffee with me sometime?" he asked. Melanie stared at him. Coffee? From a man who looked like he could own half the state? Her instinct was to say no, to laugh, to walk away, to pretend this wasn't happening. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he asked. No pressure, no charm act, just honesty, vulnerability, even. The same kind she had seen that freezing night. "We'll see," she said softly, allowing a small, uncertain smile to cross her face. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan smiled back. As he turned to enter the old building, the one everyone said would be demolished, Melanie stood rooted on the sidewalk. Her heart thudded in her chest like it knew something her mind hadn't caught up with yet. This wasn't just a return. It felt like a beginning. But beginnings, she had learned, often came disguised. In blankets, in silence, in second glances, on familiar streets. And now, in the unmistakable feeling that nothing would be the same again. Rain had swept through Willow Creek the night before, leaving puddles that mirrored the overcast sky. Inside the diner, the scent of brewed coffee and fresh cinnamon rolls created a small haven from the cold. Melanie moved between tables with practiced grace, but her mind wasn't with the orders. Every time the bell over the door chimed, her eyes flicked up, expecting to see him. Not the version in the hood, but the one who stood in the street, and said, "You kept me alive." Whispers had already begun to circle town like leaves in the wind. Some executive from the city. Big money. Buying the old Whitmore building. No one suspected he'd once slept near a laundromat, covered by a stranger's kindness. Melanie said nothing, not because she wasn't curious, but because part of her feared what the truth might mean. Could someone really change? That much? And more than that? What did he want now? The door opened again, but it was just Mrs. Collins picking up her usual to-go order. Melanie forced a smile and handed over the bag. Yet underneath her calm, questions pulsed. Why had Ryan come back? Why now? And why her? It had been just a blanket, a granola bar, a moment she hadn't expected to mean anything. But his voice, "You kept me alive," still echoed through her like a promise waiting to unfold. Later that afternoon, she took the long way home, past the old publishing house. The construction crews were already unloading equipment, their movements precise and purposeful. A black SUV sat at the curb, and standing nearby, leaning casually against a post, was Ryan. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just a gray sweater, jeans, and a look of quiet resolve. Melanie's steps slowed without her realizing that he saw her first. A nod, nothing more, but enough to erase the distance between them. She debated walking away. Life had taught her that attention from men like him never came without cost. But something about Ryan felt different. Not because of his money, but despite it. She found herself crossing the street before her head had time to argue with her feet. "So," she said, stopping beside him. "You stayed." "I did," he answered. "I said I had a meeting, remember?" A chuckle slipped from his lips, soft, a little unsure. Melanie looked at the building. "Looks like more than a meeting." Ryan followed her gaze. "It was my father's first office. Before Whitmore Enterprises took off. I bought it this morning." She tilted her head. "Sentimental?" "Strategic," he replied, then added after a beat, "And maybe a little sentimental too." They stood in silence, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken things. A gust of wind passed, making her shiver. Without thinking, Ryan shrugged off his jacket and offered it to her. Melanie stared at it. "I gave you a blanket. That doesn't mean you owe me a coat." His expression turned serious. "I don't believe in owing. I believe in remembering." She hesitated, then slipped it on. It smelled like cedar and something warm, clean, something safe. She didn't want to like it, but she did. Ryan walked with her down the block, neither of them speaking much. The quiet felt natural, not forced. "What are you planning to do with the building?" she asked. He looked ahead. "Something useful, something that matters. But I don't have all the answers yet." She glanced sideways. Unusual for a CEO. That made him laugh. A real one this time. Unusual for a runaway CEO with a lot to make up for. Melanie blinked. "Runaway?" Ryan sighed. "I left the company 2 years ago. After everything, I needed to disappear. To stop being who everyone said I was." "And now?" she asked gently. "Now," he said, voice low, "I want to build something where people aren't invisible." Melanie didn't answer right away. She thought of all the nights she had cleaned tables, unseen. The times customers looked through her. Or worse, down at her. Ryan's words stirred something she hadn't let herself feel in a while. Possibility. "That's a nice idea," she finally said. "But ideas are easier than action." He nodded. "Which is why I'm not doing it alone." Her brow lifted. "You brought a team?" "Not yet." He stopped walking. Faced her. "I was hoping. Maybe you'd be interested." The words stunned her. "Me? You know this town. You know people. You have more empathy in one glance than I've seen in boardrooms full of degrees." Melanie searched his eyes. "You don't even know me. You gave me a blanket," he said softly. "That's more than most." Her instinct screamed to say no. She didn't belong in business meetings or office launches. She made coffee and memorized pie orders. But under his gaze, she felt seen. And maybe, just maybe, she was tired of being small. "I'll think about it," she replied. Ryan smiled. "That's all I ask." They reached the corner of Main and Pine, where her apartment was. Melanie paused. "Well, good luck with the building." "Thanks," he said, and his voice dipped low again. "For everything." She looked away, unsure of what to say. "You're welcome," she murmured, already feeling the shift, the beginning of something she couldn't name. Back in her apartment, she stared at the jacket still, wrapped around her. Her fingers traced the stitching at the cuff. The warmth hadn't faded. Neither had the weight of his words. She hadn't asked for any of this. But somehow, it felt like life had quietly tapped her on the shoulder and said, "You're not invisible." Either. Meanwhile, Ryan stood in the center of the empty building. His footstep. Melanie stood by her window that evening, watching the lights flicker on across the street. The diner's neon sign buzzed softly in the distance, casting a glow on the wet pavement. Everything looked the same, but inside her, something had shifted. The conversation replayed in her mind, not just his offer, but his presence. There was sincerity in Ryan's words, the kind that didn't ask to be trusted, just understood. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to understand. She'd been surviving for so long. She had forgotten how it felt to be invited into something that might matter. She made tea, her hands slow, thoughtful. The apartment smelled like chamomile and quiet. On the small table beside her bed sat his jacket, folded neatly but not returned. Melanie stared at it, heart tugged by a feeling she couldn't quite name. Not attraction, at least not only that. It was recognition. In him, she saw someone who'd lost something, who carried ghosts in his silence. And in her, maybe he'd seen someone who wouldn't try to fix him, just sit beside him until he found the strength to try again. That kind of bond didn't happen every day. Across town, Ryan stayed in the unfinished building long after the crew had gone. Dust clung to the edges of the windows, but he didn't mind. He stood in the middle of the empty floor, imagining what could be built here. Not just walls and desks, but stories. Second chances. A place where people like Melanie wouldn't just be seen, they'd lead. He pulled the blanket she once gave him from a drawer in his duffel bag. Folded, worn, but still whole. Just like him. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope. Deeply, quietly, fully. Echoing off the walls. He remembered being a child here, sitting under his father's desk, pretending to be important. Everything had changed since then. But the look in Melanie's eyes, strong, grounded, unapologetically real, reminded him what mattered. Not titles, not legacy. Presence. He pulled out his phone, opened a blank memo, and typed 2 words, the foundation. That would be the name. A place that rebuilt more than businesses. A place for people like her. Like him. People who had been broken, overlooked, dismissed, but who still stood up, day after day, and gave warmth in a cold world. The kind of place where things begin again. Outside, clouds broke slightly, letting in a thin ray of sun. Willow Creek wasn't used to changes like this. But something told Ryan the town was ready. He certainly was. And he had no intention of disappearing again. Not now. Not after her. Because some strangers don't stay strangers forever. Some change everything, just by stopping to care. Asterisk. Sunlight stretched across Willow Creek, casting long golden beams on the sidewalks as the town woke slowly. Melanie stirred her coffee absent-mindedly in the diner's back corner, far from the morning chatter. Since her talk with Ryan, she hadn't been able to quiet her thoughts. It wasn't just the offer. It was the feeling of being noticed for more than her ability to serve a perfect cup. That kind of recognition had weight. And it lingered long after the moment passed. Outside, construction at the Whitmore building had accelerated. People came and went, clipboards in hand, voices low and purposeful. Melanie watched from the window between orders, curious despite herself. Ryan hadn't returned to the diner. Not yet. But something told her he was waiting, without pressure, without a deadline. She didn't know whether that made her feel calmer or more exposed. Either way, it kept her pulse uneven. After lunch, she took a break near the alley behind the bakery, where the quiet soothed her. That's when she saw him again. Ryan, crouched beside a pair of workers adjusting a pipe. No suit, no authority display, just a man getting his hands dirty. When their eyes met, he stood and brushed his palms on his jeans. "Didn't think I'd see you here," he said, his voice warmer than the autumn air. "I live here, remember?" Melanie replied, folding her arms, the edge of a smile tugging her lips. "I haven't forgotten," he said softly. "I just didn't want to crowd you." That honesty, so rare, so unguarded, made her pause. "I've been thinking," she admitted, stepping closer. "About what you said. About helping." Ryan's brows lifted, expectant but patient. And Melanie took a breath. "I'm not a businesswoman. I'm not corporate. I don't Do spreadsheets or team strategy? I know, he said gently. That's not why I asked. Her throat tightened. Then why? He looked at her for a moment, as if searching for words that could carry everything he felt. Because when I had nothing, you didn't look away. You saw a person, and that's the kind of leadership this place needs. Not polished. Present. Melanie blinked. His answer stripped her of defense. In a world full of noise, his truth was quiet, but it hit hard. I'm not sure I'm ready, she said honestly. Good, he replied. That means you're already ahead of half the people who think they are. She laughed, despite herself. You're persistent, I'll give you that. Only when it matters, he said. I steady. There was a beat of silence, and then she gave the smallest nod. Not a yes, but not a no. Enough to plant something real. Later that week, Melanie found herself inside the building she once walked past without notice. The walls were still bare, the furniture temporary, but something about the place felt alive. Ryan showed her sketches, plans, even a rough mission statement. It was ambitious, but grounded. You want to turn this into a hub for social renewal? She asked. Community, education, small startups, creative support, he replied. Not charity. Opportunity. Melanie ran her fingers along the edge of a wooden table. People will say you're idealistic. Let them, Ryan shrugged. What matters is we do it anyway. She looked around, saw possibility where others might only see risk. Maybe she didn't have credentials, but she had stories. Of people, of struggle, of strength. And suddenly, the idea of being part of something bigger didn't feel so far away. That afternoon, Ryan drove her home. Neither spoke much during the ride, but the quiet between them had changed. No longer filled with hesitation, it carried a pulse, a rhythm they both recognized. At her door, she turned to him. Thank you, she said. For what? For not assuming I needed saving, she replied. And for asking instead of telling. Ryan smiled. That's a lesson I learned the hard way. As the car pulled away, Melanie stood on her porch for a long time, watching the sun dip low over Willow Creek. The town hadn't changed, but something inside her had. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she no longer feared taking the first step. That night, she opened a notebook she hadn't touched in months. Blank pages waited like fresh soil. She began to write ideas. Across town, Ryan sat alone in his makeshift office, reviewing blueprints. But his thoughts kept drifting to the diner. The way she had spoken, clear, steady, real. In a world built on false promises, Melanie was substance. He didn't know if she'd stay in the project long-term or in his life. But for the first time since his fall, he wasn't afraid to hope or to try. The next morning, a folder appeared on Ryan's desk. No note, no message, just one word scribbled on the tab, Roots. Inside, pages of community initiatives, ideas for youth programs, and a hand-drawn map of local resources. He knew instantly who it came from. A smile spread slowly across his face. She hadn't said yes with words. She had said it with action. That evening, they met again, this time in the building's back lot, where Ryan had arranged a small fire pit and folding chairs. No business talk, just stories, laughter, and a sense of something quietly blooming. As the stars emerged above them, Melanie leaned back in her chair and whispered, This is the kind of silence that heals. Ryan didn't answer. He just nodded, because he felt it too. The fire crackled softly between them, casting dancing shadows on their faces. Melanie hugged her knees to her chest, letting the warmth seep into her skin. Across from her, Ryan stared into the flames, a faraway look in his eyes. I used to sit around a fire like this with my brother, he said quietly. Before the business, before everything got complicated. She looked at him, surprised by how open his voice sounded. What happened? He hesitated. We stopped talking. Too much pride. Too many things left unsaid. Melanie didn't press. Silence had its own language, and sometimes the bravest thing you could do was let it speak. Ryan continued after a moment. He died in a car accident, the night after we fought about a company decision. His voice cracked slightly. I never said goodbye, never told him I was proud of him. Melanie's heart ached. She reached across the space between them and touched his hand lightly. No words, just presence. That was enough? You carry that, she said softly. I do, he admitted. But it's why I came back. I want to build something he would have believed in. She nodded slowly, feeling the sincerity in every word. Then let's build it. But with people in mind first, not just purpose. Ryan looked up, meeting her gaze. That's exactly what I need. In that moment, something shifted again. Not romantic yet, but intimate, human. The kind of bond that forms when truth is shared freely. They talked for hours about town history, about dreams, about what it meant to be seen. Melanie told him stories about the people in the diner. The war veteran who sat in the same booth every Tuesday. The young single mom who left notes of encouragement under napkin holders. Ryan listened, not as a businessman, but as a man hungry for something real. And in those stories, he found roots, anchors to a world he had forgotten how to touch before. They parted. He walked her to her building in silence. At the door, she hesitated. This, whatever it is, she said, it matters. But I don't want it to be a story you forget once the lights turn back on. Ryan stepped closer. You were the only person who saw me when I disappeared. I couldn't forget you if I tried. His voice didn't tremble, but hers did. Good, because I'm not disappearing either. She turned and went inside before her knees gave out. Upstairs, she stood by the window, watching him linger at the corner. He didn't look up, didn't need to. Some connections didn't require constant contact, they simply remained. Melanie clutched her sweater tighter and let out a long, shaky breath. This wasn't about falling in love, not yet. This was about returning to life, to hope, to being part of something that might just grow into more. Ryan, back at his apartment, stared at the blueprint board, the lines and angles blurred. In his chest, a new design had begun, less structured, more alive. He pinned her map, Roots, in the center of the wall, then circled it. Tomorrow, they'd meet with local artists, teachers, and nonprofit leaders. But tonight, he let himself close his eyes and imagine what it would be like to build something that didn't just stand tall, but stayed. Asterisk. The morning air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Inside the old Whitmore building, Melanie stood by the open windows, watching the town stir to life. Tables were being set up, flyers pinned to corkboards, and the buzz of soft voices filled the room. Community leaders, artists, small business owners, people who usually didn't sit at the same table, were now gathering to dream together. Melanie's heart raced, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years, purpose. Ryan moved through the room with calm confidence, greeting everyone with sincerity. He didn't speak like a CEO. He listened, asked questions, remembered names. Melanie watched him from a distance, noticing how naturally he shifted between planning and presence. Gone was the man wrapped in silence and frost. In his place stood someone warmer, still guarded, yes, but changed. She wasn't sure what role she played in that, but she felt the echo of it in every quiet glance he gave her. During a break, Ryan found her near the refreshment table, pouring coffee. You did this, he said, nodding to the bustling space around them. No, she corrected. We did. You gave people something to believe in again. He looked at her, eyes steady. You gave me that first. The words made her chest tighten, but she didn't look away. Then I hope you don't waste it, she said, gently. Ryan smiled, not wounded, grateful. I'm trying, Melanie. Every day. As the event wrapped, people lingered. Ideas had turned into notes, notes into names, and names into commitments. The foundation was no longer a concept. It had breath now. Melanie stayed behind to help clean up, stacking chairs and gathering papers. Ryan offered to walk her home again, and this time she didn't pretend to hesitate. The streets were quieter than usual, as if the town itself was watching something quietly bloom. They walked side by side, the distance between them almost gone. Did you ever think, she asked, that rebuilding your life might begin in a place like this? Ryan shook his head. I didn't think I could rebuild it at all. Melanie glanced at him, slowing her steps. Why did you really come back? He didn't answer immediately. Because something in me wanted to be found, and I didn't know where else to go but back to where I was forgotten. Melanie absorbed the words like rain into dry soil. She stopped near her steps, turning to face him fully. You were never forgotten, she said quietly. Just missed by the wrong people. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone with something deeper. Ryan looked at her as if seeing her, for the first time all over again. And you? He asked. Do you still feel unseen? She paused, considering. Less now than I ever did. There was no kiss, no grand gesture, just the kind of silence that speaks louder than words. Ryan reached out, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "I'm glad you're here," he said. Melanie leaned slightly into the touch, then stepped back, not to retreat, but to anchor herself. "Me too." The night air wrapped around them, cool and clear. In that moment, neither of them needed more. The foundation was being laid, slow, strong, real. The following days unfolded like soft waves, steady, building momentum. Melanie found herself spending more time at the foundation, helping organize meetings, connecting with locals, giving voice to ideas that might otherwise be ignored. Ryan was always nearby, never overbearing, but present in a way that anchored the space. The rhythm between them grew organic. No roles, no labels, just two people building something. Together, word of the project spread beyond Willow Creek. Small media outlets began to mention the initiative. Former colleagues of Ryan reached out, curious, skeptical. Some questioned his motives, others tried to invest. But Ryan declined all outside funding. "This has to grow from here," he told Melanie. "Not from power, but from people." She nodded, understanding more than he realized. Power had taken enough from both of them already. One evening, while reorganizing supply boxes, Melanie found a framed photo wrapped in bubble paper. It was a picture of a young Ryan and his brother, sitting barefoot on a porch, laughing with popsicles in hand. She held it carefully, as if touching a part of him he rarely revealed. Ryan entered moments later and froze when he saw it. "I forgot that was in there," he said softly. Melanie didn't speak. She simply placed it on the shelf beside the entrance, where everyone would see it. Later that night, she stayed behind to tidy up alone. Rain tapped gently at the windows as she swept the floor in silence. Ryan returned unexpectedly, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa from the diner. "Peace offering," he said. Melanie raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not knowing how to tell you that I miss talking when you're not around," he admitted. Her breath caught, not from the words, but from how easily he said them now. They sat on the floor, backs against the wall, sipping cocoa and watching the rain blur the streetlights. "You're not who I expected," she said. "Good or bad?" he asked. "Just real," she answered. "And that's rare." He looked at her, grateful but uncertain. "Sometimes I wonder if this is just a season. If I'll disappear again." Melanie didn't flinch. "Then make the season count. Even if it doesn't last forever." That honesty shook something in him. Not fear, but freedom. She didn't ask for guarantees. She asked for presence. That night, as they locked up, Ryan reached for her hand. He didn't hold it, just brushed his fingers against hers, enough to feel the pulse that matched his own. Melanie didn't pull away. She just looked at him, and in her eyes was a quiet yes to something still unspoken. A few days later, the foundation held its first open event, Voices of Willow. Locals shared stories, artwork, music. The building pulsed with laughter, with memory, with hope. Melanie read a short piece she had written about belonging. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she saw Ryan in the back, arms crossed, eyes locked on her like she was the only one in the room. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her presence filled every word. After the event, as guests slowly left, Ryan found her backstage, standing alone. "You were incredible," he said. "It was just a story," she replied. "No," he said. "It was a reminder of why this matters." Melanie looked down, cheeks warm. "I didn't think I'd ever be brave enough to say those things out loud." Ryan stepped closer. "Then I'm honored I got to hear them first." The air between them shifted, closer, slower, charged. Outside, the town glowed under soft lamplight. Ryan walked her home in silence, but the silence had weight now, like a question waiting for the right moment. At her door, Melanie turned to him. "You keep showing up," she said. "Because I want to," he replied. "Not just for this place. For you." Her breath caught again. "And what happens when the past catches up?" He paused. "Then we face it. Together, if you let me." Melanie didn't answer. Not with words. She leaned in and kissed his cheek. Gentle, brief, but electric. Ryan stood still, eyes closed for a heartbeat longer. "Good night, Ryan," she whispered, stepping inside. He smiled to himself as the door closed. It wasn't a declaration, but it was real. And it was enough, for now. That night, Melanie lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her life had been built on cautious steps, quiet resilience. But something in her had shifted. She was no longer surviving. She was living. The future still scared her. The gap between their worlds still loomed. But the bridge they were building, brick by brick, glance by glance, was strong enough to hold the weight of both their truths. Ryan, alone in his apartment, stared at the photograph of him and his brother. For years, he had chased redemption in the wrong places. But here, in this little town, with a woman who asked for nothing and gave everything, he found something more powerful than absolution. He found connection. And in that connection, he found himself. Asterisk. The next morning brought more than sunshine, it brought rumors. Whispers flitted through town like wind through cornfields. He's here for her. She's just a waitress. What could he possibly see in her? Melanie heard them everywhere, in the grocery aisle, outside the diner, between casual greetings masked in concern. Willow Creek had always been kind, but small towns had long memories and quick tongues. Still, she walked with her head high, even if her heart thudded quietly beneath her ribs. Inside the foundation, the atmosphere buzzed with new energy. Ryan had set up workstations open to the community where students and job seekers could access resources. Melanie watched teenagers explore design software, a retired carpenter offering tutorials, and a single mother helping another woman write a resume. This was the vision taking shape. Yet even in the joy, the words outside clung to her like fog. The world wasn't always cruel, but it did make people pick sides and question the unfamiliar. When Ryan arrived that afternoon, Melanie was in the reading room, sorting donations. He noticed the tension in her shoulders instantly. "Bad day?" he asked gently. She kept folding books into boxes. "Small town noise," she replied. "It happens." He waited. "Want to talk about it?" "No," she said, then softened. "I just need a minute to remember it's not the truth." He nodded. "Take all the minutes you need." Later, she found him in the upstairs studio, reorganizing blueprints. "I heard some of it," he admitted. At the gas station, Melanie leaned on the doorframe. "Let me guess, people think I'm the reason you stayed." Ryan turned to her. "You are one of the reasons I stayed." She blinked. "That's not helping." "It's not a shameful thing, Mel," he added. "You gave me something real. People fear what they don't understand." She crossed the room slowly, stopping just a few feet away. "I'm not ashamed of you, Ryan. I'm scared of being the reason people discredit you." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then they don't know me, and they certainly don't know you." She exhaled. "I didn't sign up to be in anyone's story." "Then let's write one no one else can narrate," he said, voice low and certain. It wasn't a solution, but it was a promise. The following week, the local news outlet came to interview Ryan about the foundation. Cameras, lights, microphones. Melanie stayed in the background, organizing papers in a corner while pretending not to listen. When the reporter asked about the mission, Ryan said, "We're not just building a center. We're rebuilding trust in people and second chances." The interviewer smiled. "And what inspired this change in direction for you?" Ryan looked past the lens, directly at Melanie. "Kindness. Unexpected and unforgettable." She flushed, caught in his gaze. The reporter glanced between them, but said nothing. The footage aired that evening, and by morning, the gossip had turned again. Some were inspired, others suspicious. But Melanie no longer shrank from their eyes. She had been invisible before, and worse, underestimated. Now, whether praised or criticized, she was seen, and she chose to stand in that light, even when it burned a little. That afternoon, a storm rolled in fast and hard. Rain hammered the roof while wind swept leaves into the entryway. Power flickered twice, then cut completely. The foundation went dark. People froze mid-conversation, uncertain. Melanie moved first. Candles in the drawer near the copier. She called out. Ryan grabbed flashlights from the storage room. Within minutes, the team had the space glowing with warmth again. In the soft glow, people laughed, telling stories from childhoods without phones or internet. One elderly woman started humming an old tune, and within moments, a quiet sing-along took over the reading room. Melanie sat beside Ryan near the staircase, the light from a candle flickering between them. "See," she whispered, "you didn't need power to build something electric." He grinned. "You really are the heart of this place." Melanie looked away, hiding a smile. "Don't say that unless you mean it." "I do," he said simply, "and I'm tired of pretending I don't." She met his eyes, startled by the vulnerability in them. Why now? Because every time I hold back, I lose a piece of what matters, he said. And I'm done losing. Her heart pounded, the weight of his words settling deep. So what are you saying? She asked. I'm saying I want to be more than the man you saved in the cold, Ryan said. I want to be the man who stays, even when things heat up. Melanie stared at him. People will talk. Let them, he replied. Let's give them something real to talk about. It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough to ignite something neither of them dared name. The lights returned. Just as the sky cleared, people clapped. Someone joked that the foundation had better vibes than City Hall. But Ryan and Melanie remained still, surrounded by candlelight and unsaid things. He brushed her hand again, this time not by accident. And she didn't pull away. There was no rush between them, only rhythm. The kind that waited until the time was right. And now, maybe, it was asterisk. The next morning brought a quiet calm to Willow Creek. The storm had passed, but its presence still lingered in puddles along sidewalks and dew on window panes. Melanie arrived at the foundation early, unlocking the front door before the sun had fully risen. The building, still hushed, felt sacred in its silence. She stood in the middle of the main room, taking in the weight of what had been built. Not just a space, but a story. One she never expected to be part of. In her office, a folded note sat atop her desk. No envelope, no name, just 3 handwritten words, "Don't stop blooming." Melanie smiled without meaning to. Ryan. It was his way, not loud, not showy, but deeply personal, the kind of encouragement that met her in her quiet places. She tucked the note into her planner like a secret worth protecting. Then she opened her laptop and began planning the next community workshop. Later that morning, she led a session for teenage girls, some shy, others bold, all carrying more than they let on. They spoke about self-worth, pressure, purpose. Melanie listened more than she spoke, letting the room become what it needed to be. At the end, one girl stayed behind. "You don't seem like someone who used to be invisible," she said softly. Melanie met her gaze. "I was, but someone saw me, and I started seeing myself." Ryan entered just in time to catch that last sentence. He paused in the doorway, his chest tightening at how simply she'd said something so profound. Melanie looked up and met his eyes, and though the room was still full of voices, there was a quiet between them, shared and steady. The girl looked between them and smiled, then slipped out. Moments like that didn't need to be explained. They were felt. That evening, Ryan invited her for a walk by the edge of the woods behind town. The path was familiar to locals, but it felt like uncharted territory when they walked it together. Leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the scent of pine clung to the breeze. "I used to hike here as a teenager," Ryan said. "It was the only place I didn't feel watched." Melanie glanced sideways. "Funny, it's the only place I ever felt seen." They paused near the edge of a clearing where wildflowers still bloomed, defiant against the shifting season. Melanie crouched and touched one gently. "Do you think things really last?" she asked. "Sometimes," Ryan replied. "But sometimes it's about letting something exist fully, even if only for a moment." She looked at him. "And us. I want it to last," he said, "but I'll still show up if it doesn't. That's the difference." They sat on a fallen log, and for a while, said nothing. Just listened to birdsong and wind threading through branches. "Do you ever think about what your life was supposed to look like?" she asked. Ryan chuckled softly. "All the time. And then I remember that sometimes the detour is the destination." She nodded, resting her chin on her knees. "I used to think I was just background in other people's stories. But now you're the author," he finished. She smiled at the thought. "Scary, isn't it? Only if you don't realize how powerful your words are," he said. She turned toward him, searching his face. "Why me, Ryan? You could have built this anywhere. With anyone." He hesitated, then answered honestly. "Because when I was lost, you didn't rescue me. You reminded me I could rescue myself." The sun began to set behind the hills, painting the sky with soft golds and blues. Melanie stood and brushed off her jeans. "Come on," she said. "Let's head back before the town thinks I've run off with their mysterious millionaire." Ryan laughed, standing beside her. "Let them talk. At least they'll be saying something true for once." Her laugh joined his, light and free, back. In town, they stopped by the diner for takeout. The waitress raised an eyebrow as they sat side by side in a booth while waiting. Melanie just smiled and didn't explain. She didn't know the town a defense for who she chose to trust. When they left, Ryan carried both containers, insisting she'd done enough that day. She let him. Letting someone carry the weight, even briefly, was a kind of strength too. To her doorstep, she didn't rush inside. The stars were out, clear and sharp. This town, she said, gazing upward, used to feel too small for me. Ryan tilted his head, and now, she looked at him with a soft steadiness. Now it feels just big enough for something real to grow. He took a step closer, slow and deliberate. Melanie, yes? She whispered. He didn't speak, just leaned in, and this time, finally, kissed her. Not rushed, not tentative. A kiss that held the echo of everything they had built, of cold nights and silent care, of laughter by candlelight, of words unspoken finally making their way out. When they pulled apart, their foreheads touched. That, she said breathlessly, felt permanent. He smiled. That's because it is. Inside, Melanie stood in the quiet of her apartment, hand resting lightly over her heart. Her world hadn't grown louder, it had grown deeper. Outside, Ryan stood for a moment on the sidewalk, gazing at her window with a look that wasn't longing anymore. It was knowing. He turned and walked toward the foundation, the one place that now felt like both legacy and beginning. The town would keep talking, of course. That was its way. But this time, Melanie didn't fear the noise. She had found her rhythm in the middle of it. Her voice, her place, her person. The whispers would fade. What would remain was something louder than gossip, something earned and true. Presence, trust, and a connection strong enough to withstand the storm and the stillness. Asterisk. Autumn settled into Willow Creek with crisp air and trees ablaze in gold and amber. The foundation thrived. New programs launched, volunteers increased, and even skeptics began to participate. Melanie, now the official community director, filled her days with planning and purpose. Yet, beneath the warmth of progress, a quiet anxiety stirred. Some things were going too well. And in her experience, peace often invited the past to resurface. Ryan had grown more open, his walls softening day by day. He no longer flinched at praise, no longer second-guessed his place in town. His hand often found Melanie's when they walked home, his eyes lighting up when she entered a room. They hadn't defined what they were, no need. What they had was steady, grounded. But even grounding can shake when history comes calling. And Ryan's past never forgot his name. It began with an email and signed, vague. We know where you are. It's time to come back. Ryan read it alone, in the quiet of his office, the screen casting shadows across his tense face. He didn't reply, didn't mention it to Melanie. But that night, she noticed the way he held her a little tighter, how he stared into space a little longer. Everything okay? She asked gently. Just tired, he answered. She didn't press. Not yet. 3 days later, an expensive car rolled into town, black, polished, unfamiliar. It parked across from the foundation like it belonged. Melanie spotted it first. Her stomach dropped before her mind could catch up. A man stepped out, mid-50s. Tailored coat, posture sharp. He scanned the building with a look that made her skin prickle. She didn't recognize him, but her gut told her who he was, someone from that life. Inside, Ryan froze when he saw the man approach. Edward, he muttered, the name like a cold wind. Edward Whitmore, his uncle, former board chairman, and the man who had once told Ryan he was a liability to the company legacy. You've made yourself hard to find, Edward said, stepping into the office without invitation. That was the point, Ryan replied. His jaw tightened, voice low. Melanie lingered by the door, watching but unseen. I came to bring you home, Edward said simply. There's a seat waiting at the head of the table. You've made your point. Now it's time to return. Ryan shook his head slowly. This is home now. And I'm not the man you knew 2 years ago. Edward laughed, cold and sharp. You're playing community theater in a town that barely has a post office. Let's be serious. Melanie's fists clenched before her mind did. Ryan stood. Not angry, anchored. You came all this way thinking I'd trade purpose for position? Edward's eyes narrowed. This little project won't last. People lose interest. Donors pull out. Sentiment dries up. Melanie stepped forward, voice calm but firm. This little project has already changed lives. including his. Edward turned to her. And who might you be? The woman who gave him a blanket when no one else did. The silence that followed was thick with truth. Edward's mouth twitched, but he said nothing. Instead, he placed a business card on Ryan's desk. Think it over. You have a week. Then he turned and left, the echo of his shoes trailing like an unwanted memory. Ryan didn't move for a long time. Melanie stood beside him, hand resting on his back. You okay? She whispered. I don't know, he admitted. But I know what I don't want anymore. That night, they didn't talk much. Melanie made tea. Ryan stared at the fire. When she sat beside him, he finally spoke. There was a time I would have done anything to earn that man's approval. Now I can barely stand in the same room. Melanie nodded. You don't owe him your peace. Or your progress. Ryan looked at her then, eyes tired but soft. I just don't want to lose what we're building. Or you. She reached for his hand. You're not losing me. The conviction in her voice steadied him. Even if I'm pulled back into that world, he asked. Even then, she answered. But only if you choose it. Not if you're cornered by it. He exhaled. I'm not going back. Not really. But part of me still needs to close the door for good. Melanie squeezed his hand. Then I'll help you close it. The next day, Ryan drafted a letter of resignation addressed to the board of Whitmore Enterprises. Not because he was still on it, but because they still thought he belonged. He wrote it not with bitterness, but with clarity. At the bottom, he signed it, Ryan Whitmore, founder of the Willow Creek Foundation. He sealed the envelope and placed it on his desk. Let them see what I built instead, he said. News of Edward's visit traveled fast. Some townspeople grew nervous, others defensive. Melanie stood before a room full of volunteers and clarified, We're not closing, we're not selling, and we're not for sale. Applause erupted. One woman stood and said, Even if Ryan leaves, this place exists because of you, Melanie. She paused. But I hope he doesn't. Melanie smiled. Me too. That night, as rain threatened the rooftops again, Melanie opened the door to her apartment and found Ryan on the steps. Soaked, silent, holding nothing but a single daisy from the park nearby. I needed to see you before I mailed it, he said. She pulled him inside, wrapped him in a blanket, and kissed him like an answer. Then let's send it together, she whispered. Asterisk the next morning, under a soft gray sky, they walked together to the post office. Ryan held the envelope carefully, like something sacred. When he dropped it into the slot, Melanie watched his shoulders lift, as if a weight had finally let go. That chapter's closed, he murmured. It's time to write the next one. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. No applause, no headlines, just quiet victory. Sometimes healing isn't loud. It's a letter sent, a hand held, a future reclaimed. Back at the foundation, laughter echoed down the hallways as kids painted murals and staff prepared for the next town event. Life had moved forward, unapologetically and beautifully. Ryan walked into the main room, the sunlight, catching his smile as Melanie passed him a clipboard. What's next, Mr. Whitmore? She teased. He leaned closer, his voice low and full of meaning. Whatever we build next, I want to build it with you. And in that moment, surrounded by roots they'd planted with presence and persistence, she simply nodded. Then let's begin. Asterisk. Autumn deepened, painting the streets of Willow Creek with fire-colored leaves and an almost poetic stillness. But inside the foundation, the pace quickened. Projects expanded, new visitors arrived, and Melanie's calendar overflowed with calls, events, and names. She loved it, but sometimes it left little room for silence. And silence was where she processed, healed, breathed. Ryan noticed. He didn't say much, but every night, he waited with tea. And that said everything. One evening, a journalist from a national magazine arrived unannounced. Word of Ryan's transformation and the woman who had once given him a blanket had reached beyond the town line. She was polite, curious, and persistent. It's a human interest piece, she explained. From riches to roots. A redemption arc. Our readers love that. Melanie felt her stomach twist. She didn't want to be part of anyone's headline. Her kindness wasn't a plot device. Ryan declined the interview at first, but the journalist was clever. She interviewed townspeople instead. I think she saved his life, one diner regular said. He built that whole thing because of her. Melanie felt the air change. She had tried so hard to blend in, to build something with Ryan, not for him. But now the spotlight turned her into a symbol, and she wasn't sure she wanted that role. The article published days later with the title, "The Waitress Who Changed a Billionaire." Her name was everywhere. Her past, her family, her quiet heart, all dragged into the light. Strangers sent letters, some kind, some cruel. The attention overwhelmed her. At the diner, people stared too long. At the foundation, they whispered louder. Ryan tried to shield her, but fame has a way of creeping in through cracks you thought were sealed. One morning, she walked into the foundation and paused mid-step. A glossy flyer was pinned to the bulletin board. Melanie Blake, small town. Saint or opportunist? Someone had printed it anonymously. Her chest tightened. She pulled it down quickly, but not before others saw. Ryan found her in the office minutes later, clutching the crumpled paper. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I just gave someone a blanket." Ryan took the paper from her hands and tore it in half. "You gave me more than that. You gave me a reason to stay." She looked at him, eyes brimming. "Then why do I feel like I don't belong in what we've built?" His voice softened. "Because people confuse visibility with power. But you've never needed a platform to have impact. You were enough when no one knew your name. You're still enough now." Still, the damage echoed. Sponsors hesitated. Meetings grew tense. Melanie began avoiding the public eye, retreating to the corners she once claimed with confidence. At night, she sat on her porch staring into the dark, trying to find the version of herself that had stood unshaken in the cold that night. The one who offered warmth without fear of return. That girl felt far away now. She missed her. Ryan noticed the change. The light dimming. The laughter retreating. One evening, he brought her to the old bridge outside town, the one where people carved their initials into the wood. "What do you see?" he asked. Melanie looked at the river below. "Something moving too fast to catch." "No," he said. "Something steady, even when it crashes against the rocks." She met his eyes. "I don't want to be seen like a symbol." "Then don't," Ryan replied. "Be the story, not the headline. Keep showing up. For yourself. For the kids who watch you and learn. That quiet doesn't mean weak." Melanie let his words sink in. "What if I can't go back to how things were?" "Then we build forward," he said. "New ground. Same roots." It wasn't a fix, but it was a way forward. And for now, that was enough. The next day, Melanie walked into the foundation and called a meeting. She stood at the front of the room, holding the torn flyer. "If you think I built this to be admired, you've missed the point. I was just someone who couldn't ignore the cold. And I still can't. If you're here to build something real, stay. If not, there's the door." No one left. And in the quiet that followed, she found her voice again. Ryan stood at the back of the room, his heart full. Not with pride, but with awe. Melanie wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was reminding everyone that truth outlives noise. That night, he brought her a small notebook, leather-bound, blank. "For your words," he said. "So the world hears your version, not theirs." She traced the cover gently. "I didn't know I had a story to tell." "You always did," he replied. "You just started listening." That evening, Melanie sat by the fireplace in her apartment, the blank notebook open on her lap. She stared at the first page, pen hovering. Then slowly, deliberately, she wrote, "I never wanted to be seen. I just didn't want to be forgotten." The words landed like truth set free. She didn't need an audience, just a place to hold the parts of herself she'd hidden for too long. A place where survival could become story, and story could become healing. Outside, Ryan stood at the bottom of her steps, debating whether to knock. He wasn't there to fix anything, just to be near. When Melanie opened the door before he even knocked, he smiled. "Were you waiting for me?" he asked. "No," she teased, stepping aside. "But I hoped you'd come anyway." They settled into the couch without words, wrapped in shared silence. Sometimes comfort came not from talking, but from simply staying. In the days that followed, a shift rippled through the foundation. People stopped asking about the article. They stopped looking at Melanie like a myth and returned to seeing her as she always had been, someone who showed up. The whispers dulled. The focus returned. And in that quiet resilience, a new kind of leadership emerged. Not born of headlines, but of hands that lifted and listened. Melanie led from the edges, and the whole room followed. Ryan stood beside her through it all. Not in front, not behind, but next to her always. He began holding mentorship sessions with young entrepreneurs, helping them dream realistically and courageously. Melanie would peek through the glass and smile at how gentle he'd become. He hadn't lost his power. He'd learned how to wield it with tenderness. And in doing so, he taught others that strength didn't need to shout. Point 1. Afternoon, a young girl approached Melanie with a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something," she said shyly, "because you said our stories matter." Melanie unfolded it and read the words, tears welling before she finished the first line. It was a poem about being brave without being loud, about being enough, even when the world didn't clap. Melanie hugged the girl tightly. "This," she whispered, "is everything." The town, too, began to shift. Slowly but surely, new murals appeared on walls. Old storefronts reopened. People started believing again in ideas, in connection, in second chances. Willow Creek no longer whispered about the girl who saved the billionaire. They spoke about what they had all built together. The foundation had become more than a building. It had become a mirror, reflecting the best of everyone who entered it. Point 1 night, Melanie and Ryan returned to the bridge. The air was colder now, and winter hinted at its approach. Ryan handed her a small pocket knife. "Pick a spot," he said. She carved their initials into the wood, careful, deliberate, lasting. "We're not just passing through anymore," she said. "We're part of the map now." Ryan pulled her close. "We always were. We just needed to stop running from it." Back home, Melanie tucked the poem from the little girl into her notebook. Page after page was now filled. Thoughts, moments, reflections. She didn't write for applause. She wrote to remember, to stay rooted, to remind herself that she was not the background. She was the author, and the story she was telling was one worth living. From the outside, it looked like just another small town rebuilding itself. But for those who knew better, for those who had stayed when it was hard, when it was quiet, when it was uncertain, it was proof of something rare. That belonging is not something given by others. It's something chosen. And Melanie had chosen. She had stayed. And in staying, she had changed everything. The first snow arrived in silence, dusting the rooftops like a whispered promise. Children cheered outside, catching flakes on their tongues, while inside the foundation, heaters hummed and mugs steamed between gloved hands. Melanie stood by the window, watching footprints form in the white. It felt poetic, like life was leaving soft impressions again. She turned and saw Ryan speaking with a donor, calm and focused, and her heart swelled. He was no longer hiding. Neither was she. That afternoon, the two of them walked through the snowy path that led behind the building. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. "Do you ever think about how different it could have been?" Melanie asked. Ryan smiled gently. "Every day. And then I remind myself we're here because we didn't take the easy way." She nodded. "We chose to stay in the hard places. And that made them holy," he added quietly. Her eyes shimmered. She believed him. A week later, Melanie received an invitation, one she hadn't expected. A national leadership conference requested she speak on community as transformation. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking still terrified her. But Ryan encouraged her softly. "You don't have to become someone else to be heard. Just be you." So she accepted, not for visibility, but to give her town, her story, and her truth a seat at the table. The night before she left, she sat on her porch wrapped in her favorite knit blanket, the same one she once handed to a freezing stranger. Ryan joined her with 2 cups of tea. "You ready?" he asked. She exhaled. "No, but I'm going anyway." He smiled. "That's what courage looks like." They clinked their mugs. No fanfare, no speeches, just 2 people who had seen the worst of each other and stayed. The morning she boarded the train, half the town came to see her off. Kids waved hand-painted signs. Diner regulars brought homemade cookies. Melanie blinked through tears, overwhelmed. "You're already making us proud," someone called. "Tell them who we are," another shouted. Melanie turned to Ryan. "How did we become us?" He kissed her forehead. "By choosing each other, one small choice at a time." At the conference, Melanie spoke with a tremble in her voice, but not in her spine. She told them about a night so cold it almost erased someone. About how a simple gesture, without expectation, had planted a seed. She spoke of Willow Creek, of invisible people doing extraordinary things. She didn't mention titles or resumes, just hearts. And when she finished, the room rose. Not for her power, but for her presence. Back in Willow Creek, Ryan watched the live stream from the foundation, surrounded by staff, townspeople, and children who now looked to her as a symbol of what staying could become. When her speech ended, he stood first, not clapping like a proud partner, but like someone deeply honored to witness her rise. "She's ours," one volunteer whispered. "No," Ryan corrected gently. "She's hers, and that's why she shines." When Melanie returned, the town welcomed her not with fireworks, but with smiles, warm lights, and one quiet banner across the foundation gate. "Welcome home, our heart." She cried when she saw it. "I didn't think I deserved all this," she said softly. Ryan stood behind her, his hand on her back. "You didn't earn it by being perfect," he said. "You earned it by staying, by showing up, even when it hurt." They walked inside together, greeted by the laughter of children and the smell of baked cinnamon. And for the first time, Melanie didn't feel like she was stepping into a space she helped build. She felt like she was finally stepping fully into herself. The woman who gave, who stayed, who led, not because she had to, but because it was who she had always been. That evening, sitting beneath the same tree where they'd once lit candles during a storm, Melanie looked at Ryan and whispered, "Thank you for never treating me like I was small." He smiled, leaning his head against hers. "You were never small. You were just waiting for the space to stretch." Snowflakes danced around them again, but this time, they weren't bracing for the cold. They were rooted and ready, and somewhere in the hush between heartbeats and snowfall, they both knew what they had wasn't born of rescue. It was born of presence, of patience, of truth spoken softly and love chosen slowly. The storm had passed. The whispers had faded. And what remained, finally, was home. Winter deepened its grip on Willow Creek, blanketing streets, rooftops, and even the trees with a softness that silenced the world. Inside the foundation, however, the days were far from still. With the year nearing its close, the halls brimmed. With children rehearsing for a holiday play, volunteers hanging handmade ornaments, and the scent of cinnamon weaving through the air. Melanie watched it all with quiet wonder. What once was vision had become life. Ryan stood beside her, clipboard in one hand, the other casually brushing hers. Their rhythm had become so natural, it felt like breath. There were no questions about, "What are we?" Only presence. They were the kind of love that didn't need to be spoken every day, because it was shown in shared silence, in late-night cocoa, in showing up again and again. But even so, something inside Melanie stirred. A quiet voice saying, "Some words still need to be said." The town had prepared a winter festival for the first time in decades, hosted at the foundation. A stage had been built outdoors, string lights lined every street lamp, and the entire community contributed, from knitting scarves to donating baked goods. The buzz was electric. But the morning of the event, news came like a sudden chill. Edward Whitmore had returned, not to claim back power, but to offer a final proposition that he requested a private meeting with Ryan. Just him. Melanie stood in the hallway as Ryan quietly agreed. "Are you sure?" she asked. "He can't hurt me anymore," Ryan replied. "But maybe he needs to hear me say it." He kissed her temple and stepped into the boardroom, leaving the door slightly ajar. Melanie sat on the bench outside, her fingers tapping her knee, every muscle alert. Inside, the conversation was short. Edward offered a seat back on the board of Whitmore Enterprises, not with control, but as a symbol. "You've made something noble here," he admitted. "The press, the growth, the narrative. It would benefit the family name to bring you back." Ryan let the silence stretch. Then he rose and replied, "My name is no longer for sale." And that was that. He walked out lighter. Not because Edward approved, but because it no longer mattered. Melanie stood as he approached, and before she could ask, he whispered, "I said no. I said my no." She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers. "Then let's make this our yes," she said. And together, they walked out into the snow where the town waited, unaware of the final door that had just been closed forever. The festival began that evening beneath a sky filled with stars. Children performed on the stage, their mittened hands waving as parents cheered. Lights twinkled from windows and lanterns. The foundation glowed, not just with light, but with life. And in the middle of it all stood Melanie, wrapped in her old blanket, passing out cocoa and marshmallows, smiling as people called her name, not out of curiosity, but out of belonging. Later, as the final song ended, the mayor took the mic and surprised everyone. There are people in this town who remind us what courage looks like, she said. And tonight, we honor two of them. She called Melanie and Ryan to the stage. Reluctant, but smiling, they stepped forward. Applause erupted, some loud, some teary. The mayor held up a plaque. To Melanie Blake and Ryan Whitmore, for teaching us that second chances aren't given. They're chosen. Melanie's eyes welled. Ryan took the mic briefly. We didn't come here to be thanked. We came to thank you for believing in something small and letting it become something whole. Then he paused, turned to Melanie. But since we're here, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Melanie froze, one hand flying to her lips. Ryan didn't kneel. He simply opened the box and held it between them. Inside was a ring with a simple stone and a carved engraving, "Stay." He looked into her eyes. You already said yes to everything that mattered. But if you're willing, I'd like to make the staying permanent. Tears slid down her cheeks. You once said I kept you alive, she whispered. But you made me visible and real. She took the ring, slid it on herself. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Melanie only saw Ryan. Only heard the echo of quiet nights and snowfalls and cocoa and silence and words that were never loud, but always enough. He leaned in and kissed her. Gently, not for the cameras, not for the town. For her. For them. For everything they had built, piece by imperfect piece. That night, the foundation stayed open late. Music played softly from speakers. Kids danced in boots too big. Couples swayed. And in the corner, Melanie and Ryan sat wrapped in her old blanket. 2 mugs in hand, watching the town they had helped heal. This still feels like a dream, she whispered. Ryan rested his head against hers. Then I hope we never wake up. Asterisk as a gentle snow began to fall again. Melanie looked up at the sky, grateful, not for perfection, but for everything that had been built with calm, presence, and choice. She had once been just a girl with a blanket and a stubbornly kind heart. And he, a broken man trying to disappear. But in that town, in that winter, they chose to stay. They chose to love without promising ease. Only promising together. And that was enough to change everything. Inside the foundation, now quiet, Melanie turned off the lights one by one. Ryan waited by the door, hands in his pockets, wearing a soft smile. As they crossed the threshold, she looked back one last time. Not out of fear, but gratitude. Every brick, every laugh, every tear had left a mark. And the most beautiful part? Knowing that some stories don't end with a period, but with roots. And so this story ends. Or perhaps it's just beginning, like every true story of love, courage, and staying. If this story touched your heart in any way, let us know in the comments. Do you believe in quiet new beginnings that change everything? Tell us where you're watching from. Tag someone who needs this message, and share it with those who still believe that the simplest gestures are the most powerful. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, stories of transformation, real love, and choices that change destinies. Because here, we still believe in the power of staying. And you? Would you stay for someone even in the cold?